What if a single family photo could destroy everything Prince Harry thought he knew about who he is? Earl Spencer, Diana's own brother, just posted a photo that's sending shockwaves through royal circles, and Harry isn't in it. Not only that, but insiders say it was no accident. This quiet but brutal move has reignited old rumors, deepened painful family divides, and left Harry questioning not just his place in the Spencer legacy, but his very bloodline. Was this a coded message? A denial of heritage? Or something even more personal? Stay with us, because what happens next will leave you stunned. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. A single photograph. No words. No caption. Just an image, stark, composed, and cold as stone. Yet within hours, it ignited a firestorm across the world. Earl Charles Spencer, the younger brother of the late Princess Diana, posted a photo on his personal page just before midnight last Friday. It was a black and white image, a family portrait. The Spencers, standing proudly in front of Althorpe House, Diana's childhood home. All her siblings were there, their children too. The caption was absent. Not a word. But the silence was deafening, and the absence of one person was louder than any statement ever could be. Prince Harry, Diana's youngest son, was nowhere in sight. What followed wasn't just a conversation. It was an eruption. Within minutes, online forums dissected the composition of the image. Journalists reached out to royal biographers. Former palace aides began whispering to their trusted contacts. The question was unmistakable, scandalous, and dark. Was this photo a subtle but deliberate message? Was Earl Spencer, Diana's own brother, publicly questioning Harry's claim to the Spencer bloodline? To most people, it may have seemed like nothing more than a curated family memory. But to insiders, to those who know the silent codes and historical grievances that run deep in the aristocratic veins of Britain's elite, this was a declaration of separation, of rejection, of doubt. For Prince Harry, the sting wasn't just the omission. It was the meaning behind it. According to a source reportedly close to the couple, Harry saw the post in the early morning hours while pacing the kitchen floor of their Montecito home. Meghan was nearby. The moment he saw it, his hands began to tremble. He zoomed in, looked at each face, confirmed that yes, every surviving Spencer sibling was there. Even cousins he hadn't seen in years. Everyone except him. And that was the moment he is said to have turned to Meghan, voice cracking, face flushed with disbelief, and said the words that would hang over their entire weekend like storm clouds. "He never hated me until I married you." It was a line drenched in heartbreak and blame. And Meghan, according to the source, simply stared at him, speechless. To understand the weight of those words, and the avalanche they've now triggered in royal and Spencer circles alike, one must dig far beneath the surface. This isn't just about a photo. It's about blood. It's about loyalty. It's about the ghost of Diana, and the legacy both sides claim to protect. Over the past decade, Prince Harry has positioned himself as Diana's spiritual successor, the rebel who broke free from a gilded cage, who chose love over duty, who spoke truth to an institution that buried his mother in tradition and silence. In the eyes of millions, Harry became the embodiment of Diana's defiance. But not everyone in Diana's family agreed with that portrayal. And some believed Harry's rebellion crossed a line the day he walked away from his royal duties and crossed the Atlantic with Meghan Markle. Earl Spencer, by contrast, has guarded his sister's legacy with restraint and distance. Since delivering that unforgettable eulogy at Diana's funeral in 1997, in which he vowed to protect her sons from the royal machine that he blamed for her suffering, Spencer has rarely made public statements about William or Harry. But sources say that behind the scenes, Spencer's relationship with Harry began deteriorating long before the infamous Oprah interview, and even before Megxit. And this latest photo? According to several insiders, it was no accident. There's no way Charles Spencer posts a Spencer family image without Harry unless he's making a point, says one former palace official who has worked closely with both camps. And that point is clear. He no longer considers Harry one of them. Whether that's about genetics, family betrayal, or both, it's deliberate. Indeed, murmurs about Harry's lineage are not new. For decades, rumors have swirled about James Hewitt, the former cavalry officer who had a relationship with Princess Diana. Despite timelines proving that Harry was born before their affair began, conspiracy theories have refused to die, largely because of Harry's striking red hair, so different from Charles and William. The photo, say many, poured fuel on those embers. But what's changed now is that the speculation isn't coming from the press or trolls. It's coming, allegedly, from within Diana's own bloodline. And that is what has devastated Harry. According to a trusted source, Harry told a close friend over the phone, "He thinks I ruined the bloodline, and that you helped me do it." The he, of course, is Spencer. And you was directed at Meghan, who has increasingly become a symbol of everything the old aristocracy views as disruptive, foreign, and unbecoming of royalty. Insiders say Harry has been emotionally unraveling ever since the post went live. He's refused calls from select family members. He's canceled a scheduled virtual appearance for an Invictus Games fundraiser. His security detail was reportedly told to block all drone flyovers after a British tabloid was caught trying to get aerial shots of the couple's property, likely hoping to catch Harry mid-breakdown. What's even more alarming is what this fallout could mean for any chance of Harry returning to the royal fold. If even Diana's family is casting doubt on his place, then who, exactly, is left? And what of Meghan? If Harry is now seeing her as the catalyst for this chasm, if he believes, even slightly, that her presence accelerated the estrangement between him and the Spencers, where does that leave their marriage? She's always been the scapegoat, one Hollywood source connected to Meghan said. But this is different. This is deeply personal. She's being blamed not just for breaking a family, but for erasing a lineage. It's a cruel irony. When Harry married Meghan, he often said she reminded him of his mother, strong, compassionate, vilified by the press, yet beloved by the public. But now, it seems, his mother's own bloodline may view Meghan as the reason they've lost their grip on Harry altogether. One close confidant of Earl Spencer reportedly said that Charles Spencer never fully trusted Meghan from the beginning. He believed she was packaging Harry for an American audience, and that she played into his unresolved trauma rather than healing it. Harry's always been emotionally raw, the source added. He needed someone to ground him. Instead, he got someone who encouraged him to set the palace on fire. Whether that's true or not, public opinion is rapidly forming battle lines. Social media is awash with memes, theories, comparisons. TikToks analyzing Harry's facial features next to the Spencer men have gone viral. Some fans insist Spencer's post was just bad optics, not an intentional slight. Others believe it was a quiet declaration of war. One can't help but feel the deep sadness at the core of all this. Whatever the truth of Harry's bloodline, or Meghan's influence, what is irrefutable is this: a man who lost his mother at age 12 now feels he has lost her family too. And not through death, but through doubt. The emotional weight of such a fracture is not just gossip fodder. It's soul-shattering. And Harry, according to reports, is reeling from it. The same man who once declared he was finally free in California now appears more trapped than ever, caught between a royal family that has closed its gates, a public who is growing more skeptical, and a wife he may now see as the spark that set the past ablaze. But this is just the beginning, because what comes next may finally force Prince Harry to confront the question that's haunted him for decades, one that's no longer whispered but now shouted across the digital rooftops of every major tabloid and talk show. Whose son is he really? And if even his own uncle has doubts, what happens when the entire world begins asking the same? It all began with a single post. No announcement, no caption, no press release. Just a quiet update on Earl Spencer's personal social media page, which had been dormant for weeks. The photo was elegant, almost regal, in its composition, a family portrait taken at the historic Althorpe estate, the Spencer family's ancestral home. The late Princess Diana's brother stood in the center, flanked by his sisters, his children, their spouses, and even distant cousins. Smiling, composed, and undeniably proud. But glaringly, shockingly absent, Prince Harry. To those unfamiliar with royal dynamics or the subtle politics of aristocratic Britain, it may have seemed like a harmless omission. Perhaps Harry was busy, or perhaps he'd been invited and declined. But to those who understand the nuance, who recognize that in high society, what is unsaid often carries more weight than what is spoken, the message was crystal clear. This was not an accidental oversight. This was deliberate. A symbolic removal of Prince Harry from the Spencer lineage. Almost immediately, the reaction online was electric. Royal watchers, fans of Princess Diana, and critics of the Sussexes all descended upon the post like hawks. Within hours, hashtags began trending. Hashtag where is Harry? Hashtag Spencer statement. Hashtag bloodline question. Side-by-side photos of Harry and his cousins were analyzed and scrutinized. Theories mushroomed from every corner of the internet. Was this Earl Spencer's way of disavowing his nephew? Had private tensions reached the point of public exclusion? Or worse, was this an indirect accusation regarding Harry's biological identity? That last question hit a nerve that has long simmered beneath the surface of royal gossip columns and conspiracy blogs. For decades, ever since Harry's early teenage years, persistent rumors have circulated suggesting he might not be the biological son of King Charles. The theory hinges on his red hair, which many have compared to that of James Hewitt, a former British cavalry officer with whom Princess Diana admitted to having an affair. Despite the fact that the timeline of their relationship does not support the idea that Hewitt fathered Harry, as the affair reportedly began after Harry was born, the rumors have refused to die. They've lingered like smoke, never quite turning into fire, yet never fully dissipating either. The photograph posted by Earl Spencer threw gasoline onto that lingering smoke. The very absence of Harry among the Spencer family was read by some as a message. You do not belong here. Not biologically. Not spiritually. Not emotionally. Not anymore. What made the gesture even more potent was its subtlety. The photo wasn't accompanied by any inflammatory caption. In fact, it wasn't accompanied by any text at all. Just a date. Just a location tag, Althorpe House. But to anyone who understands the traditions and codes of the British aristocracy, such restraint is not neutral. It is deliberate. It is calculated. And it speaks volumes. For Prince Harry, the effect was immediate and deeply personal. According to sources close to the Sussexes, Harry found out about the post from a friend who texted him late at night, asking if he had seen it. At first, he was confused. He hadn't spoken to his uncle in months, and the family had not gathered for any official event that he knew of. But when he saw the image, something inside him reportedly broke. His reaction was not one of rage or defiance, but of shock, hurt, betrayal. In private, Harry is said to have shown the image to Meghan, his face pale and expression unreadable. When she asked him what he was thinking, he allegedly whispered, "This isn't just a photo. It's an erasure." According to a friend who later spoke to the press under condition of anonymity, Harry was visibly shaken, pacing the floor and mumbling about how the family had closed ranks. The most devastating line came when he reportedly turned to Meghan and said, "He never hated me until I married you." That single sentence has since echoed across tabloids and television screens alike, capturing the core of the current crisis. Harry's growing belief that his marriage to Meghan Markle marked the beginning of his estrangement not only from the royal family, but also from his mother's side of the family, who had once pledged to protect him in her absence. To understand the weight of this moment, one must rewind the clock back to 1997. When Diana died, it was Earl Spencer who stood at the pulpit in Westminster Abbey and delivered one of the most scathing and emotional eulogies in modern history. He called out the press, the royal institution, and society at large for failing Diana. He vowed to protect her sons, to shield them from the same fate, to ensure her memory would be honored not through ceremony, but through love and truth. At the time, the world applauded him. A man brave enough to speak against the crown. A brother unwilling to let his sister's suffering be whitewashed by royal tradition. And yet, 26 years later, that same man appears to have turned away from one of those very sons. The symbolism could not be more piercing. This wasn't just a family photo. This was a statement of lineage, a declaration of who belongs and who no longer does. Palace insiders suggest that this moment was a long time coming. Over the years, tensions between Harry and the Spencers have grown more pronounced. While public attention has always focused on Harry's strained relationship with King Charles and Prince William, little has been said about his dynamic with his mother's siblings. But according to one source who has worked with the Diana, Princess of Wales Memorial Fund, the Spencers have grown increasingly uncomfortable with Harry's portrayal of Diana in his media ventures, especially in the Netflix documentary and his memoir, Spare. They feel he's weaponizing her memory, the source explained, that he's using her image to justify his actions. And that's a line they didn't want crossed. To the Spencer family, Diana was more than a tragic figure. She was a sister, a daughter, a human being who had flaws and dreams and fears. They reportedly feel Harry has elevated her into a saint-like martyr to serve his narrative. And when Meghan entered the picture, and that narrative shifted even more toward opposition with the crown, the Spencers began to feel that Harry was not preserving Diana's legacy, but rewriting it. Still, even with these tensions simmering in the background, nothing had prepared the public or Harry for the photo. Its cold precision, its exclusionary power, and the fact that it came from Diana's own brother made it nearly impossible for Harry to dismiss it as gossip or misunderstanding. This was personal. The fallout was immediate. British tabloids ran headlines about a new royal feud. American media outlets invited experts to weigh in on the psychology of familial rejection. Royal biographers dusted off decades-old notes to trace the cracks between the Spencers and the Sussexes. And online, the discourse became toxic. Some defended Harry, saying he was being bullied by an old-guard aristocracy that could never accept his wife. Others took Spencer's side, arguing that Harry had betrayed not only his royal heritage, but also his mother's memory by airing too much dirty laundry. Through it all, the silence from both camps was deafening. Earl Spencer did not issue a clarification. No statement was released. No interview given. Meghan and Harry remained behind closed doors, their representatives declining all media requests. But silence does not mean peace. In this case, it means something far more dangerous, a deepening rupture. One that may not be reparable. As the days passed, royal watchers began to speculate on what this meant for the future. Would Harry ever be welcomed back into the royal circle if even the Spencers had turned on him? Would he and Meghan address the post publicly, or let it simmer like so many other slights? And perhaps most ominously, was this photo the beginning of a new phase in Harry's life, one where he is no longer considered part of either royal bloodline? What's clear is that something has shifted. The ground beneath Harry's feet has cracked again. And this time, it's not the crown or the press striking the blow. It's family. His mother's family. The people who once swore they'd always be his home. That makes this different. More painful. More isolating. More final. And the image that started it all, that quiet, carefully composed photo on the lawn of Althorpe, remains frozen in time, its message loud and clear for anyone willing to see. It wasn't the first time Prince Harry had felt betrayed, but this time, the betrayal didn't come from the royal institution, the press, or even his father. This time, it came from home, or what he had once considered home. The moment he saw Earl Spencer's photo, a part of him cracked. And that fracture ran deeper than anger. It was personal, almost surgical, like a slow and deliberate emotional amputation. Those closest to him described the scene as eerily quiet in the Montecito estate that morning. The California sun was rising over the hills, bathing the minimalist mansion in golden light, but inside, everything was frozen in place. Meghan had just made coffee. Archie was playing in the next room. Lilibet was still asleep. Then came the vibration of Harry's phone, a message ping from an old friend back in the UK. Have you seen what your uncle posted? At first, Harry didn't flinch. He assumed it was some article or reposted interview. But as he clicked the link and the image opened up on the screen, something in him shut down. His thumb hovered over the glass, scrolling in, searching each face, scanning the lineup for some mistake. But there was none. He was not there. Everyone else was. He set the phone down, stared at the wall. Meghan asked what was wrong, and for a while, he said nothing. But then came the low words, almost inaudible. He never hated me until I married you. The line wasn't sharp or blaming. It was broken. A child whispering through the adult shell of a man who had lost more than the public could ever see. It wasn't an attack. It was a confession. According to one person who has been in regular contact with the Sussexes, Harry's reaction to the photo was one of quiet implosion. He didn't yell. He didn't call his uncle in rage. Instead, he sat down on the kitchen floor, staring at nothing, his hands clenched into loose fists. He was overwhelmed not by fury, but by confusion. That's what made it worse. The not knowing. Had Spencer truly meant to erase him? Or was it all just a cruel oversight, an unfortunate coincidence that would go uncorrected? But Harry had been raised in the world of careful optics and silent messaging. He knew the rules. If someone in the royal or noble class says nothing, it usually means everything. The days that followed were a fog. Harry canceled 2 calls, one with an environmental charity in Africa and another with a mental health organization he co-founded. Staff were instructed to hold all press inquiries. Reporters who tried to reach out through mutual friends were turned away. Inside the house, things were tense. Meghan was supportive but unsure of how to help. She reportedly told a friend, "He's not angry, and that's what scares me." This wasn't like the blow-ups Harry had faced after the Oprah interview or the Netflix docuseries backlash. Those felt like battles with an enemy he had already decided to leave behind. This was different. This was from the side that had always been presented as a refuge, his mother's side. Diana's blood. The one tether he thought might still connect him to a part of himself he hadn't fully lost. One of the most painful elements, according to those familiar with Harry's private thoughts, was that Spencer had once promised to protect him. At the funeral, his uncle's words were etched into his heart that Diana's blood family would do right by her boys. That promise had felt like armor in the years after Diana's death. When the royal family was cold or distant, Harry held on to the idea that the Spencers were different, more human, more loyal. But now that illusion was shattering. Harry always saw the Spencers as a kind of backup family, said one former royal aide. When things went wrong with the royals, he still believed he had his mother's side. And now that's gone too. Behind closed doors, Harry reportedly replayed moments from his childhood, trying to piece together signs. He remembered Christmases at Althorpe, summers with his cousins, the laughter in the hallways of the estate. But even then, there had been distance, a subtle, lingering sense that he was the outsider. He always chalked it up to his being the royal, the son of the future king. Now he wondered if it had always been more than that. One particularly haunting moment was when Harry allegedly walked into his home office later that week and opened a drawer containing a framed photo of him with Diana and Spencer, taken just after a summer polo match. He stared at it for a long time. Then he took it out of the frame and set it face down. That single act, quiet and unseen, may have said more than any public statement ever could. According to insiders, Meghan attempted to speak to Spencer through back-channel contacts, hoping to clarify the situation or even arrange a private conversation to ease tensions. But she was reportedly met with silence. No reply. No interest. That, too, left a mark. If Harry had felt excluded, Meghan now felt vilified. She was used to being attacked by tabloids and trolled online, but this felt different. This felt permanent. Harry's friends in the U.S., a close-knit circle that includes a few celebrities, ex-military confidants, and philanthropic partners, say he began withdrawing from social contact. He stopped attending local events. He delayed travel plans. For days, he barely slept. At one point, he reportedly asked Meghan, "Do you think I really look like him?" referring to Earl Spencer. When she replied yes, Harry didn't respond. He just stared into the distance, visibly torn. There is something uniquely devastating about having your blood questioned. About being told, implicitly or otherwise, that you are not part of the very history you were raised to defend. For Harry, this was not just a public spectacle. It was a personal unmaking, an emotional deconstruction of his identity. And he was now left to sift through the wreckage. Even Archie noticed the shift. Sources claim Harry became quieter around his son. Not distant, but subdued. The normally playful, expressive father seemed preoccupied, distracted. Meghan tried to encourage him to talk, to share what he was thinking. But Harry, a man who has already endured unimaginable grief and relentless scrutiny, seemed locked in an internal war. On one side, the love for his wife and children. On the other, a legacy that now appeared to be crumbling beneath him. And yet, through it all, he never once reached out to Spencer. Not to ask why. Not to express his hurt. Not even to demand an explanation. That, perhaps, is the truest indication of how deep the wound went. It wasn't the kind of pain that called out for confrontation. It was the kind that left you hollow. One insider summed it up best. Harry's not looking for a fight anymore. He's looking for something that doesn't exist, a version of his family that still sees him as one of their own. As days passed, reporters began circling once again, sensing a deeper rift. They weren't wrong. But there would be no confirmation, no press release, no comment from Montecito or Althorpe. Just silence. And in that silence, the world would begin to construct its own truths, its own versions of Harry's reality. But for the man at the center of it all, once the cheeky, red-haired boy walking behind his mother's coffin, now a prince with no country and a family that seems to reject him on both sides, the question isn't what the public believes. It's what he now believes about himself. While Prince Harry retreated into emotional silence, grappling with the weight of rejection from the Spencer family, Meghan Markle found herself standing in the eye of a very different storm, one that wasn't quiet at all. This storm was public, loud, and merciless. The moment Harry's alleged comment, "He never hated me until I married you," surfaced through anonymous leaks, the focus of scrutiny shifted. All eyes turned to Meghan. For critics, she was no longer just controversial. She was now being framed as the catalyst for a generational fracture. It wasn't the first time Meghan had been placed at the center of blame, but this time the accusation struck a deeper chord. The world wasn't just blaming her for palace politics or broken protocols. They were suggesting she was responsible for Prince Harry's erasure from his own maternal legacy. Not even Buckingham Palace had succeeded in that. But in the eyes of her fiercest critics, Meghan had accomplished what the monarchy, the British media, and even time itself could not. According to several sources close to Meghan, she was stunned by the photo when she first saw it. Not because she hadn't expected coldness from Earl Spencer, but because she didn't believe he would make such a gesture so publicly. She reportedly stood in silence, examining the image multiple times, trying to convince herself that it meant nothing. But deep down, she knew what Harry knew. The exclusion wasn't incidental. In private, Meghan's initial reaction was fury. Not the kind expressed in shouting or slamming doors, but the quiet, breathless rage that builds when you feel utterly powerless. She knew the media storm that would follow. She knew how the headlines would spin it. And most of all, she knew she would be painted as the reason why Diana's brother had metaphorically turned his back on Diana's son. Within hours, Meghan's name began trending online alongside Harry's. Commentators revived old criticisms that she was manipulative, divisive, calculating. In the minds of some, the photograph became another entry in a long list of so-called proof that Meghan had stolen Harry from everything that made him who he was. Never mind that Harry had long expressed dissatisfaction with royal life. Never mind that he had made decisions independently of her before they were even married. The court of public opinion had made its judgment. She broke the Spencers. Meghan tried, in those early hours, to distance herself from the narrative. She told a confidant that this was Harry's pain, not mine to control. But no matter how far she tried to remove herself from it, the arrows kept flying. Media outlets framed the story as Meghan versus the Spencers, and social media users dug into her past for evidence of a long-term strategy to isolate Harry from his family. Old footage of her talking about breaking generational trauma was reinterpreted as an admission of guilt. Her every word, every photo, every smile was now viewed through a distorted lens of suspicion. What many failed to see, however, was the toll this was taking on her privately. Sources close to the Sussexes say Meghan felt blindsided, not only by Earl Spencer's post, but by Harry's reaction to it. It wasn't just that he was hurt. It was that his hurt became a mirror in which she saw herself being held accountable for wounds that predated her entirely. In the days following the photo's release, Meghan reportedly confided to a friend, "I'm his wife, not his puppeteer. If they think I programmed him to feel abandoned, they don't know the man I married." Still, she knew perception could quickly morph into reality. And perception, in their world, was currency. Behind closed doors, there were conversations. Difficult ones. Meghan asked Harry whether he truly believed she had caused the rupture between him and his mother's family. He denied it outright. "I don't blame you," he reportedly said, "but I think they do. And I don't know how to undo that." That answer wasn't cruel, but it cut. For Meghan, it was a painful confirmation that no matter how many charitable causes she supported, no matter how hard she worked to humanize their story, she would always be the outsider. Not just to the royal family or the British press, but now, it seemed, even to Diana's bloodline. And that outsider status wasn't just symbolic. It carried real consequences. Rumors swirled that Meghan had once hoped to organize a charitable project in Diana's name, something centered around global maternal health, echoing her own advocacy. But after the fallout with the Spencers, such a plan appeared dead on arrival. Allegedly, calls to certain foundations were no longer being returned. A silent wall was going up, and Meghan felt it closing around her. For Meghan, perhaps the most agonizing realization was that no matter how loudly she told the world that she had tried to unify Harry with his roots, the narrative was already written. To many, she would never be the woman who supported him through trauma. She would always be the one who led him away from tradition, away from duty, and now away from blood. Yet despite the pressure, Meghan didn't collapse. She didn't issue public statements or take to social media. According to those near her, she instead became fiercely protective of Harry. She worried not for her own reputation, but for his psychological state. She reportedly confided in a friend that this was the beginning of an emotional war inside Harry's soul, one that no therapist or podcast or TED Talk could solve. She encouraged him to speak to someone, his therapist, his counselor, even William, but he wasn't ready. He wasn't angry enough to lash out or calm enough to process. He was caught in between, and that frightened her more than anything. The Harry she fell in love with was bold, expressive, often emotionally raw, but always articulate. The Harry she now saw walking through their Montecito garden seemed distant, detached, as though he were speaking to ghosts. Meghan also began receiving messages of sympathy and frustration from her inner circle, actors, activists, writers, many of whom were angered by the narrative forming around her. Some suggested she give an interview. Others advised her to leak private conversations that could reveal Spencer family tensions going back years. But she declined. "I don't want to destroy anyone," she allegedly said. "That's never been my goal. But they're making it very hard to stay silent." Meghan also feared what this would do to her children, particularly as they grew older and became aware of how deeply fractured their family story was. Archie, now old enough to begin asking questions, was already noticing things. Why didn't they ever visit Grandpa Charles? Why wasn't Uncle William around? Why was everyone in England so angry with Mommy? There were no easy answers to those questions. And in the wake of the Spencer fallout, Meghan feared there never would be. Still, not everyone turned away. A few quiet messages of support came from people within the Spencer circle, distant cousins, family friends, even an unnamed niece. These were not public acts of defense, but private olive branches meant only for Meghan's eyes. They told her that not everyone agreed with the exclusion, that some were appalled by the photo, that they believed the timing and composition of the post were not coincidental. Those small gestures mattered. They didn't undo the damage, but they reminded Meghan that she wasn't entirely alone. And she needed that reminder, because in the court of global opinion, the verdict was swift and brutal. She was the crossroad, the intersection where past and future collided. And now, every misstep Harry took, every emotion he expressed, every family fracture that widened, was being traced back to her. There's a cruelty to being cast as the architect of someone else's pain, especially when you're the one holding them as they grieve. And that, in many ways, is the paradox of Meghan Markle's life now. Loved by millions, hated by millions more, and perhaps most tragically, blamed for things that were broken long before she arrived. To understand the gravity of Prince Harry's exclusion from Earl Spencer's family photo, one must look beyond the singular moment and peer into the legacy of division that runs through the Spencer bloodline. The rupture that exploded in public view with that carefully composed image was not born overnight. It had been brewing for years, quietly, discreetly, and often hidden behind the grandeur of noble facades and charitable appearances. The Spencers, like the Windsors, are a family built on lineage, tradition, and quiet control. And somewhere along the way, Harry no longer fit the mold. The Spencers are one of the oldest aristocratic families in Britain. Long before Diana became the Princess of Wales, the Spencer name carried weight in the corridors of power. Their estate at Althorpe was more than a family home. It was a living monument to English nobility. And unlike the royal family, whose lineage is entrenched in duty to the crown, the Spencers pride themselves on heritage, an identity deeply rooted in land, blood, and social standing. This worldview, while discreet, is rigid. When Princess Diana died in 1997, her brother Charles Spencer became the de facto guardian of her legacy. His speech at her funeral was a direct indictment of both the royal family and the media, vowing that Diana's blood family would protect her sons, William and Harry, from the same forces that consumed her. At the time, it was seen as noble, a promise to act as the moral compass where the monarchy had failed. But that speech also drew an invisible line, us versus them, the Spencers versus the Windsors. In the years that followed, Earl Spencer kept his distance from the crown, focusing on his estate, his own family, and charitable projects tied to Diana's memory. His public role was minimal, but symbolic. He was the quiet anchor of Diana's bloodline, a reminder that not all traditions lived within Buckingham Palace. But what many didn't see was the subtle shift in how he viewed his nephews, especially Harry, as they grew older and began to forge their own paths. For William, who aligned himself with the monarchy, there was mutual respect. He carried forward Diana's legacy in a way that complemented his royal obligations. He rarely challenged the institution, choosing instead to modernize it from within. This path comforted the Spencers, who saw it as dignified, even if a little restrained. William was Diana's son, yes, but he was also the future king, and he acted like it. Harry, on the other hand, was a different story. From an early age, he rebelled against expectation. His carefree attitude as a teenager, his scandals in the press, his disdain for tabloid culture, all painted him as the spare living in the shadow of duty. Still, for a while, the Spencers tolerated it. Some even admired it, seeing shades of Diana in his desire to break free from rigid roles. But the true rupture began when Meghan entered the picture. From the outset, Meghan Markle represented change, a biracial, American, divorced actress who carried her own voice, her own fame, and her own interpretation of what it meant to be royal. To a family like the Spencers, who cherish continuity and discretion, Meghan wasn't just different. She was disruptive, not because of her background, but because of her approach. The Spencers, like many British aristocrats, believe in the power of silence and letting time and tradition dictate public perception. Meghan, by contrast, came from a world where controlling your own narrative was survival, where silence meant surrender, where the press was something to be managed, not endured. It wasn't long before Meghan and Harry's decisions, stepping back from royal duties, speaking out publicly, engaging in lawsuits against tabloids, were viewed by some in the Spencer family as violations of an unspoken code. One Spencer cousin reportedly described their behavior as unbecoming of the name. Another told a friend, "Diana fought the system. She didn't abandon it." These sentiments grew stronger after the couple's interview with Oprah. The moment Harry and Meghan began publicly criticizing the royal institution, the Spencers felt their late sister's name was being invoked as a shield rather than a legacy. Earl Spencer, in particular, is said to have been deeply disturbed by Harry's repeated references to Diana as justification for their actions. He reportedly believed that Diana's memory was being distorted, used not as a moral compass, but as a political weapon. This ideological clash widened the existing fault lines within the Spencer family. Some cousins remained loyal to Harry, seeing him as a continuation of Diana's spirit, a rebel with heart. Others felt Harry had crossed a point of no return, trading loyalty for liberation, and dragging the family name through controversy after controversy. By the time the infamous photo was posted, these internal divisions had calcified. What looked like a casual family gathering was, in fact, the product of carefully selected invitations. The Spencers had reportedly discussed excluding Harry from family events since late 2022, following the release of his memoir. In it, Harry made several references to his mother's family, including moments that painted them as distant or disengaged after her death. These portrayals reportedly angered some family members, who felt unfairly depicted and betrayed. One cousin reportedly told a friend, "We're tired of being the convenient symbol of his grief. He wants us to carry Diana's banner while he rewrites her story." That sentiment, echoed among others, suggested a deeper philosophical divide. To Harry, Diana's legacy was about breaking away. To the Spencers, it was about preserving her essence within the structure she tried to change. The aftermath of the photo deepened these rifts even further. Some family members were appalled by the backlash, believing that the image had been misinterpreted. Others doubled down, insisting that Harry had made his bed and must now lie in it. No official statement was released, but behind closed doors, the conversations were raw. Charles Spencer himself reportedly remained stoic. Those close to him say he believes the photo was a truthful representation of where the family stands. When asked privately if he regrets not including Harry, he allegedly responded, "You can't include someone who no longer sees you as family." That quote, if true, speaks volumes. It signals a turning point, not just for Harry's relationship with his uncle, but for his place in the broader Spencer lineage. The bonds of blood, once considered unbreakable, had been stretched thin. And in a family like the Spencers, once they snap, reconciliation is rare. It's important to note that not all Spencers agreed with the exclusion. A few relatives, speaking anonymously, expressed discomfort with the public message the photo sent. One younger cousin reportedly tried to reach out to Harry in the days following the uproar but was met with silence. Others debated whether a quiet reconciliation should be attempted through intermediaries. But the dominant feeling was resignation. The lines had been drawn, and any gesture now might be perceived as weakness or retraction. The divide also had generational undertones. Older members of the Spencer family, raised in the strict traditions of British aristocracy, leaned toward protecting the family's image. Younger members, more attuned to modern values and media dynamics, were split, some seeing Harry as brave, others as reckless. But all of them knew that the fallout from the photo would not be resolved with an apology or a statement. It had become emblematic of something far more permanent. In the end, what the photo exposed was not just Harry's alienation, but a deeper crisis within the Spencer identity itself. How does a family that prides itself on noble continuity reconcile with a world that demands transparency, voice, and change? And can a man like Harry, who embodies that change, ever truly belong to a lineage that views tradition as its lifeblood? These are not questions that will be answered in headlines or public apologies. They are questions that will linger in silence, in private corridors and ancestral halls, in the spaces between what is said and what is posted without words. What remains undeniable is this: the Spencer family is no longer whole, and whatever trust or loyalty once bound them together across oceans, generations, and grief, it has been irrevocably broken. There are moments in public life when history, emotion, and conspiracy converge in such a way that the line between fact and rumor blurs completely. Prince Harry's life has always been marked by those moments. But in the aftermath of Earl Spencer's family photo, posted conspicuously without Harry, an old, haunting question was resurrected with renewed venom and scrutiny. Is Prince Harry truly a Spencer by blood? Or has the question of his paternity always cast a silent shadow over his life? To the public, the timing of the photo felt too calculated to be coincidental. Its immediate impact wasn't just emotional, it was genealogical. People began to whisper again, as they had done decades ago, about the possibility that Harry was not the biological son of King Charles III. Though long debunked by timelines and logic, the theory persisted. And this time, Earl Spencer's omission was interpreted by many as a deliberate reignition of that fire. The theory is rooted in a single detail: Harry's red hair. A stark contrast to the more muted tones of the royal family, especially his brother William. For those seeking conspiracy, it was enough. They pointed to James Hewitt, the former cavalry officer who had a well-known affair with Princess Diana in the 1980s. The gossip claimed he was Harry's real father, based on similar facial features and the red hair they appeared to share. But the truth, supported by facts and dates, has always been clear. Diana did not begin her relationship with Hewitt until after Harry was born in 1984. Even Hewitt himself has publicly denied being Harry's father, calling the rumors painful and unfounded. Nonetheless, the whispers endured, fueled by media's sensationalism and a public fascinated with royal scandal. What's different now is not the theory itself, but who is being seen as its source. When a tabloid or online forum questions Harry's paternity, it's dismissed as clickbait. But when Diana's own brother posts a photo omitting Harry, seemingly divorcing him from the Spencer name, the implication carries far more weight. Earl Spencer's silence only amplified the speculation. No clarification was issued. No statement of support. Just a cold, glaring absence. To many, the question wasn't just about Charles anymore. It was about whether Harry was a Spencer at all. As the image spread across news cycles, internet forums lit up with armchair genealogists comparing facial structures, hairlines, posture, even smiles, between Harry, Earl Spencer, and other members of the Spencer clan. Composite images were created. Side-by-side analyses trended on Twitter. Theories multiplied. Some claimed Harry's jawline more closely resembled Hewitt's than Charles's. Others said his eyes matched the Spencers too perfectly to question anything. But the renewed debate wasn't confined to the internet. Sources close to both Montecito and the British aristocracy confirmed that the speculation had reached private circles too. Donors, journalists, even certain distant royal relatives were quietly asking questions again. Not necessarily because they believed the theory, but because the photo had made it relevant once more. According to a source familiar with Meghan and Harry's inner circle, the speculation hit Harry harder than anyone could imagine. The emotional toll of having one's very blood questioned, not by strangers, but by family, isn't something easily shaken off. Harry, already destabilized by the perceived betrayal from Earl Spencer, now found himself forced to confront one of the most painful rumors of his life all over again. In private, Harry reportedly fumed. Not with the media, not even with the public, but with the people he felt should have stood by him. The family members who, by doing nothing, had tacitly allowed the whispers to resurface. One friend said Harry was devastated that the ghost of James Hewitt had been revived not by tabloids, but by his own uncle. Meghan, meanwhile, reportedly urged Harry to ignore the gossip. She reminded him that the truth had already been clarified, that no DNA test was needed to prove who he was. But Harry wasn't listening, not because he believed the rumors, but because he couldn't believe his uncle would give them oxygen. In moments of despair, he allegedly questioned whether Earl Spencer's omission was more than symbolic. Had the Spencers quietly doubted his lineage all along? Had Diana ever been honest with them? Was this a long-held suspicion finally being made public? To someone on the outside, these may seem like irrational questions. But to Harry, whose life has been shaped by trauma, loss, and persistent abandonment, they were entirely logical. The combination of grief and scrutiny had created a dangerous mental spiral. The question of a DNA test, previously a tabloid fantasy, suddenly became a point of real tension in Montecito. According to one confidant, Harry discussed taking one privately not to settle a public debate, but to settle an internal war. Meghan was reportedly against the idea, fearing it would only validate the rumors. But Harry wasn't seeking validation. He was searching for something far more elusive: certainty. There's a tragedy in that. A prince, born into one of the most powerful families in the world, unsure of where he truly belongs. Surrounded by legacy but isolated from identity. It wasn't about the crown. It wasn't even about the name. It was about knowing that when he looked into a mirror, he could see something that anchored him, not to duty, but to truth. The irony, of course, is that even if Harry were to take a DNA test, it wouldn't silence the whispers. If the results confirmed Charles as his father, conspiracy theorists would claim the data was faked. If they didn't, it would unleash a global firestorm unlike anything the monarchy has ever faced. Either way, the truth would no longer belong to him. This realization, according to insiders, ultimately stopped Harry from going through with the test. Not because he didn't want answers, but because he understood that those answers would never be his alone. They would belong to the public, the media, and every enemy he and Meghan have made since stepping away from royal life. Meanwhile, the palace remained silent, as did Earl Spencer. The strategy, it seemed, was to wait for the storm to pass. And publicly, perhaps it did. The news cycle moved on. Another scandal took its place. But for Harry, the questions didn't fade. They lingered in his mind, louder in the quiet moments, heavier in the empty ones. One source close to Harry said he spent an entire night walking alone in their Montecito garden, staring at the sky. He kept asking what his mother would have wanted, the source said. Would she want him to ignore this? Or would she want him to stand up and demand the truth, no matter how painful? No one could answer that question. Not even Meghan. And perhaps not even Diana if she were alive. What this chapter in Harry's life has revealed is a deeper crisis of identity, one that transcends family politics or public narratives. It's the fear of not knowing where you belong, of having your blood questioned, your legacy erased, your roots yanked from the soil you thought held you firmly. And while Earl Spencer may never speak a word about the photo or its intentions, the damage is done. The image hangs in the digital ether, quietly suggesting that the youngest son of Diana may no longer be seen as one of their own. For Harry, the question isn't just whether he's a Spencer. It's whether the people who share his mother's blood ever truly believed he was. As the speculation surrounding Prince Harry's bloodline and the implications of the Spencer family photo dominated headlines and saturated social media, the royal family maintained a silence so sharp it could slice through steel. In times of crisis, silence has long been the weapon of choice within the House of Windsor, a method perfected over generations. It isn't just avoidance, it's strategy. A performance of indifference carefully designed to appear regal and aloof, even when the walls are crumbling inside. Following the eruption of commentary surrounding Earl Spencer's post and the public's revived scrutiny of Harry's parentage, Buckingham Palace, Clarence House, and Kensington Palace all declined to comment. This wasn't surprising to royal watchers. The monarchy's unofficial motto, never complain, never explain, remains alive and well. But insiders say the silence, this time, was more than business as usual. It was intentional, tactical. According to multiple sources close to palace aides, conversations were indeed taking place behind the scenes. Senior advisors reportedly held private meetings within hours of the social media backlash gaining momentum, not to draft a statement, but to assess the fallout. They were less concerned with the emotional impact on Harry and more focused on what this meant for the institution's image. Would the royal family be perceived as complicit in Harry's alienation? Was Spencer acting independently or with encouragement? Was a family fracture playing out in public again? Or was this something new? Something dangerous? There were no immediate answers, but one thing was certain: the royal family would not engage. They would not clarify, defend, or sympathize. Instead, the firm would do what it has always done best: close ranks and wait. In many ways, this was the exact response Harry expected. But knowing it didn't make it easier. His attempts to re-establish any kind of bridge with the palace had already been met with coldness in recent years. Now, with this new development, he wasn't even afforded the courtesy of concern. No message from his father. No outreach from William. No contact from any of his former staff. He had become, once again, a man alone. Inside Montecito, the silence from his family was louder than the noise of the tabloids. Harry had grown used to public criticism. He had even braced himself for backlash from his mother's side. But the calculated silence from the Windsors hit differently. It told him everything he needed to know, not just about where he stood now, but about where he'd always stood. To the world, it seemed the palace was avoiding scandal. But to Harry, it felt like confirmation of an unspoken truth. They didn't care. A former palace official, speaking anonymously, said that in private, the royal family was far more reactive than the public would ever know. They monitor headlines constantly. They have dedicated teams reporting on every mention, every story. When the Spencer photo story broke, it wasn't ignored. It was dissected. According to the same source, King Charles was briefed within 24 hours. He reportedly responded with a single word: predictable. That response, whether born out of weariness or bitterness, reflected the current state of his relationship with Harry, fractured beyond routine repair, laced with unspoken resentment. Prince William, too, was reportedly made aware of the fallout. But unlike Charles, William's reaction was colder. Advisors close to him say he showed little emotion, simply stating that Harry has made his choices. For William, Harry's repeated public criticism of the family has been seen as a betrayal too far. This new chapter, no matter how painful, was viewed as a consequence of that betrayal. But there were those within the palace who believed a quiet gesture should have been made. Some aides suggested that even a private phone call, something away from cameras and headlines, would have sent a powerful message. That despite all the conflict, Harry was still part of the family. That the firm hadn't completely turned its back. Yet those voices were ignored. This royal silence didn't just come from Charles and William. It extended across the entire Windsor machine. Not a single royal-affiliated account acknowledged the controversy. No subtle social media corrections. No quiet stories leaked to trusted journalists to provide context. Nothing. It was as if Harry had vanished not only from family photos, but from the institution entirely. The strategy was to maintain distance. Both literal and figurative. The monarchy, already battling public scrutiny on multiple fronts, saw Harry's crisis not as an opportunity for reconciliation, but as a risk to avoid. And in royal circles, managing risk is the highest priority. Yet the optics told a more complicated story. For many watching around the world, the royal family's refusal to acknowledge Harry's pain only reinforced perceptions of cruelty and emotional detachment. The very institution Harry had spent years accusing of indifference was now proving his point in real time. They weren't just ignoring him. They were ignoring what he represented, a man asking to be seen, not as a title, but as a person. This calculated silence extended to public appearances. In the days following the photo scandal, King Charles appeared at several engagements, visiting charities, hosting diplomats, and smiling for cameras. His demeanor remained unchanged. There were no slips, no reactions. But the message was clear. Business as usual. Prince William, too, continued his public duties without pause. At a climate summit, he gave a speech praising collaboration and legacy. Observers noted the irony, discussing legacy while ignoring the fracture in his own family tree. Meanwhile, Kate Middleton, ever composed, carried out engagements with her signature poise. But behind the scenes, there were whispers that she had privately expressed concern for Harry, despite the deep tension. According to one aide, Kate had once hoped that time would heal the brothers' rift. But even she, in recent months, had begun to see it as irreparable. The queen consort, Camilla, remained characteristically silent. Her presence in family matters was always more influential than visible. Insiders suggest she has long advocated for a firm stance on Harry and Meghan, seeing their behavior as destabilizing to the institution. Her influence on Charles's silence, many believe, is substantial. What remained most jarring about the palace's response was the stark contrast to their previous statements of unity. When the Queen passed, there were carefully choreographed gestures designed to show a family coming together. But with the release of one photo, just one, those illusions shattered. And the strategic silence that followed confirmed that beneath the surface, the wounds were still raw. For Harry, this royal distance reinforced his worst fears. Not only was he being cast out by the Spencers, but the royal family had made no effort to draw him back in. Meghan, recognizing the emotional impact, reportedly encouraged Harry to focus on their children, their life in California, and the projects they were building together. But Harry couldn't look forward without confronting the past. He had lost his mother. He had abandoned the crown. He had even walked away from the only home he had ever known. But what haunted him most was that the people left behind, the ones who were supposed to love him unconditionally, seemed to have already moved on. In Montecito, the silence from across the ocean echoed louder than any insult. There were no calls from Windsor, no texts, no inquiries from royal cousins. It was as though he had become a ghost, alive, but unseen. And in the world of royalty, visibility is everything. When you're no longer acknowledged, you no longer exist. As silence gripped the royal family and the Spencers kept their distance, the vacuum was quickly filled by a frenzy of voices outside the palaces, those of the global media and the public. What neither Charles, William, nor Earl Spencer would say publicly became fodder for journalists, pundits, influencers, and internet sleuths who wasted no time stepping in to tell the story themselves. From the moment Earl Spencer's photos circulated across the internet, media outlets pounced. At first, it was treated like any other intriguing royal development. A speculative omission, a subtle insult, an ambiguous gesture. But by the next morning, the tone had changed. Leading British tabloids like the Daily Mail, the Sun, and the Telegraph ran headlines suggesting the rift between the Spencers and Prince Harry had deepened beyond repair. In the United States, networks like CNN and ABC explored the emotional fallout. On talk shows and news panels, the central question was raised again and again. Was this image just a snub, or was it something more sinister? The speculation snowballed. Royal commentators began revisiting the old paternity rumors. Radio hosts invited psychologists to weigh in on the impact of familial exclusion. Social media platforms turned into echo chambers of conflicting narratives. By the end of the week, #SpencerSnub and #DianaLegacyWar were trending globally. Everyone had a theory. In the UK, the traditional royalist press took a defensive stance, portraying the Spencer photo as nothing more than a private family moment that had been blown out of proportion. Some publications even suggested that Harry had intentionally distanced himself from the Spencers and was now playing victim to garner sympathy. Phrases like self-imposed exile and attention-seeking prince appeared repeatedly across op-eds. But in more liberal or international outlets, especially those based in America, the narrative tilted in Harry's favor. Journalists revisited his history of emotional turmoil, including the trauma of losing his mother, his battles with the press, and his break from royal duty. In this framing, the Spencer exclusion was not just a snub. It was a symbolic act of cruelty inflicted on a man who had already been through more loss than most people could bear. What became clear very quickly was that the story had moved beyond the simple question of inclusion in a family photo. It had evolved into a global referendum on Harry's identity, legacy, and character. For some, he remained the boy who walked behind his mother's coffin, trying to hold back tears in front of the entire world. For others, he had become a symbol of betrayal, a figure who had willingly turned his back on tradition and then cried foul when it turned its back on him. Social media played a crucial role in deepening the divide. On platforms like Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram, users dissected the photo, reposted it with commentary, and created viral threads drawing links between Harry's facial features and various Spencer relatives. Some defended him passionately, creating tribute videos showing his bond with Diana and highlighting his past appearances at Althorpe. Others mocked him, creating memes that compared him unfavorably to other royals and suggesting he had no one to blame but himself. One particularly viral TikTok video, which garnered over 15 million views in 3 days, featured a montage of Diana and Charles' photos interspersed with images of Harry and Hewitt, underscored by ominous music and the caption, "What they never told us." It was presented not as satire, but as pseudo-evidence, carefully edited and emotionally manipulative. And millions believed it. This rapid spread of visual misinformation blurred the line between truth and conspiracy even further. In many ways, the media had lost interest in verifying facts. What mattered now was the drama, the spectacle. The Spencer-Harry story had become entertainment, and Harry, once again, was its tragic protagonist. At the same time, prominent voices in journalism and academia began weighing in on the cultural implications of what was unfolding. Columnists in The Guardian and The Independent questioned the continued obsession with royal bloodlines, arguing that the very idea of lineage had become an outdated and harmful construct. Others suggested that the public's fixation on Harry's paternity reflected deeper anxieties about race, class, and modern identity. In the U.S., The racial element of the controversy was not lost. Many commentators pointed out that Meghan Markle's presence in Harry's life continued to be the axis around which much of the backlash spun. The idea that marrying Meghan had disqualified Harry from his family's approval played directly into conversations about bias, heritage, and institutional prejudice. For those who viewed Meghan as a symbol of necessary change within a centuries-old structure, the photo was a coded rejection not just of Harry, but of everything his marriage represented. This angle was especially popular on American talk shows and podcasts. Hosts like Trevor Noah, Oprah, and various YouTube personalities questioned why Meghan continued to be blamed for Harry's decisions. "He's not a child," one commentator remarked. "He's a grown man making conscious choices. If his uncle chooses to exclude him, why is that Meghan's fault?" The public, too, split into camps. Some wrote heartfelt posts and open letters defending Harry. Others condemned him as ungrateful. A recurring theme in criticism was the idea that Harry wanted the freedom of a private life but also the attention of a royal one. These criticisms intensified after Meghan and Harry were spotted at a local charity event days after the Spencer controversy exploded. While the event had been scheduled months in advance, detractors saw their appearance as another example of hypocrisy, choosing visibility when it served their image. And yet, even among critics, there was acknowledgement of something deeper happening. One journalist writing for a European magazine noted that the intensity of the public's reaction wasn't just about Harry. It was about the uncomfortable fact that a family, a powerful, influential, noble family, had seemingly rejected one of its own in the most public way possible. This, more than anything, struck a nerve with the global audience. Because behind the royal protocols and aristocratic rules, people recognized a deeply human story, a man longing for acceptance, and a family choosing silence over reconciliation. As the days turned to weeks, the story began to evolve again. Analysts started debating the long-term consequences. Would this damage Harry's public image permanently? Would he respond? Would the Spencers try to walk back the implications? And what did this mean for the monarchy, already grappling with succession challenges, generational divides, and plummeting trust? For Harry, the media's frenzied dissection became its own form of pressure. He was not just mourning a perceived rejection. He was doing so while the world watched, judged, and speculated. Meghan reportedly began limiting their exposure. Sources say she advised against interviews, press statements, or any response that might escalate the situation. Instead, she encouraged focusing on their foundation, Archewell, and continuing their private work behind the scenes. But Harry remained uneasy, not because he wanted attention, but because he couldn't shake the feeling that the silence from his family was being interpreted as truth. And therein lay the power of the media spin. In the absence of clarity, speculation becomes reality. Perception becomes truth. And for Harry, whose very identity had now become a matter of global debate, the perception was cutting deeper than any headline. One article in an international outlet perhaps summarized it best. In this war of bloodlines, silence is louder than words. And for Prince Harry, the message could not be clearer. You are not one of us. Whether that message is true or not, the damage has been done. When the world points fingers, when family closes its doors, and when legacy is thrown into question, even the strongest relationships can find themselves cracking under pressure. Meghan and Harry have weathered many storms together, from relentless media attacks to their dramatic break from the royal family. But those who know them closely say the aftermath of the Spencer photo sparked something different. Something raw. Something quietly corrosive that no camera could capture. It wasn't loud arguments or public spats. It was the creeping silence that settles in when pain is no longer easily named. At the center of the fracture was one line, spoken in a moment of vulnerability. "He never hated me until I married you." A statement, yes, but also a confession. An accusation not thrown in malice, but born of helplessness. When Harry said it, according to sources familiar with the scene, it wasn't to blame Meghan. It was the desperate voice of a man trying to understand how he had come to be rejected by his own blood. But for Meghan, that line carried a weight she couldn't ignore. In the days following the viral explosion of Earl Spencer's family photo, tension